Chapter 16. A saucer-shaped moon of heavy gold rose into the blackening sky as the last traces of a crimson-purple sunset liquefied into the Caribbean. In the dim light streaming from the early moon and the late sun, the silhouette of a lone naked warrior appeared over a jagged ridge of rock. Dutch Schaefer was bathed in the gold of the moon on his left and the blood-red flickerings of the fading sun on his right. He had swathed his naked body entirely in clay and ochre, creating a mottled earthen camouflage pattern. He looked like an idol risen from a tomb. Holding his makeshift bow in one hand, he moved up the canyon, ascending into a rising field of boulders like fragments of a meteor. The river below him flowed into a series of falls and pools, surrounded by massive tabletop rocks, their crevices jammed with driftwood, swept down at high water from forests above. On a flattened section of the ridge, Schaefer dragged a large tangle of branches into view, adding it to a growing mound of firewood. He knelt, tending to a pile of dried grass, leaves, and other tinder. Using the last of his precious matches, he set a fire cupped in his hands, gently breathing and coaxing the tiny blaze into a slowly gathering fire, flames starting to lick upwards through the dry pyre. He stood now, staring into the rapidly growing blaze, turned and faced the canyon rim, raising his weapons high in one hand. From the depths of his blood, a war cry burst, and as he threw back his head, it rushed through his lungs and windpipe like a howl. It transcended time and worlds, primitive and visceral, as if from a wounded animal in pain beyond pain. The wail echoed for miles through the jungle canyons and silenced all the prowlers and night birds around him. It was the commando's beckoning invitation to the alien. His eyes flared in the yellow-orange glow of flames, and in that moment he looked unconquerable and terrifying, his mud-painted muscles tensed and ready. The alien had retreated to its ship and was standing in the open doorway as Schaefer's echo came piercing through the trees within earshot. The cry was universally translatable, not just between peoples, but between all worlds, wherever war had meaning. The creature craned its neck and lifted its head into the night, looking like a wolf cussing the moon as it heard the cry and instantly understood its meaning. Instinctively, it responded, but with a snake-like hiss that no one heard. Still, the seething noise boiling in its throat was an acceptance of Schaefer's call to battle. It turned back into its ship, raising its weapon in one hand, while in the other it held a U-shaped sharpening device, rather like a tuning fork. As the alien passed the tip of the weapon through the fork, the spear that had slain all the other commandos flashed to life, emitting a deep, harmonic hum as the blade glowed with energy, growing hotter and hotter with each stroke. The creature drew the now white-hot blade through the sharpener one last time, then lifted it to its golden eyes, studying its balance, the flashing alloy of the blade illuminating its humanoid face. The weapon meant something deeper than any mere object. To the alien, it was a kind of extension of its will. Emerging now from its interplanetary womb, the creature swung up to the tree line, climbing to the uppermost branches. It travelled silently from crown to crown, arriving at last at the canyon rim, where far below it could see Schaefer's bonfire in the valley, the leaping, shifting, multicoloured collage of heat waves and flares luring the alien onward, spellbound like a moth. As the bait drew the predator, Schaefer hid back from the flames, tucked in a crevasse of rock and broken tree stumps on the slope above the bonfire. His eyes shifted, trance-like, moving from side to side, watching the approaches to the fire below. His senses were alert, his nerves on a wire edge. The alien began its descent, its shadow form descending through the canyon, a rippling movement of greys and blacks passing across the shifting light patterns on the canyon walls cast by the glowing flames below. Its golden eyes probed the canyon, hungry to get closer to the swirling patterns of heat thrown off by the gaseous flames of the bonfire. Schaefer sat motionless in an Indian crouch, waiting for destiny to arrive, nearly invisible in his mud camouflage, one with the darkness of the trees and the rocks. Suddenly, all around him, he noticed the buzz and click of insects and the croak of frogs had stopped. He immediately recognized this as a sign of the alien's presence, for he'd come to understand that all creatures sensed and feared the invader. Schaefer drew his makeshift bow to full arc, his wounded shoulder trembling, the blood beginning to seep through the bandage again from the muscle's strain. With the bow at full draw, he stared intently, concentrating, searching for the alien's iridescent form in the dancing light below. Then, like a giant insect, it dropped from above, rocketing down as if from the sky, its steel-like spurs digging deep into a tree stump. Schaefer froze at the sound, his mud-rimmed eyes wide with fascination and fear. He couldn't tell how far away the creature was in the darkness. Maybe 50, 75 feet. The Major knew that the slightest movement on his part would bring on an instant attack, so he waited as still as a stump himself. At that moment, he felt a weird comfort to know he was more at one with the jungle than his enemy. Enticed by the heat patterns vibrating from the fire and lacing into the canyon darkness, the alien dropped another 30 feet closer to the flaming lure. It raised its weapon, still white as steel newly tempered, like a mythic warrior's sword. The yellow optic cells glittered like a honeycomb in the reflection from the fire as the alien looked around, slowly. The quiet hissing sound escaped from its tensed mouth like a burning fuse, an instinctive signal that it was in a battle mode. As Schaefer squatted motionless and rigid, he heard the low thump of the alien's feet landing on a nearby table rock. Swift and silent, the Major turned and fired a poisoned arrow at the sound. It zipped through the darkness, and an instant later he heard the telling thud as the tip lodged in the trunk of a tree. "Shit," muttered Dutch, berating himself for wasting a shot and for betraying his presence. The arrow had missed the alien's bulbous head by inches. The predator was as quick to strike back. Its arm whipped so fast it was only a blur in the fire-shot night as it activated its weapon, the projectile streaking downward and exploding into a log so close to the Major's leg he could feel the wind. The impact sent up a shower of wood chips into the night. It was like a terminal game of chess now, and once again it was Schaefer's move. He clutched his makeshift weapons, leaping from boulder to boulder as he fled the vulnerable spot. He jumped down into the clearing near the fire, landing hard, rolling out of the light and into the protective shadows of the rocks on the far side. Now the roaring bonfire lay between man and alien, like a sacred zone of death and regeneration. Schaefer glanced around and saw that he was in a sort of natural amphitheatre formed by the sheer walls of rock that shot up 100 feet behind him into the black night sky. Shadows cast by the fire danced eerily across the rough stone, till Schaefer was almost certain he could see the outline of a painted form, the ancient glyphs incised into the stone. As the Major positioned himself under the protective overhang of a jut of rock, he found himself in a small space, protected on 3 sides. He crouched with his bow and felt the pain scream across his shoulder. The wound was spilling blood freely again, and as he watched it drip onto the stony ground, he could see broken pieces of pottery and the carved head of a jaguar that looked like jade in the dancing firelight. But he didn't have a minute to root around for treasure. For all he knew, these fragments would mark his grave. Then, above on the rocky plateau, the silhouette of the alien appeared for a single moment. It looked victorious and huge against the sky, its form revealed in the play of the flames. It moved now, down the rocky wall, gliding in and out of the darkness like a serpent, as the rocks would now and then shelter it from the orange glow. As the creature crept slowly downward, nearer and nearer to the light, Schaefer distinguished a new sound over the crackle and sputter of the fire and the rushing river far below. A sound that brought fear and a savage determination to his heart. It was the rhythmic scraping of the alien's hard, tusk-like foot spurs, screeching like chalk on a blackboard. The Major rose slowly to his feet, slung another arrow into the bowstring, and drew back on it as he moved out of the shelter and around a large boulder, heading towards the scraping sound. They were only feet from each other now. The creature paused erect in the strobing light, craning its head and slowly turning as it tried to orient itself towards the diversity of the sounds. The circular walls of the rocky amphitheatre ricocheted everything, throwing its delicate radar off. Fortunately for the Major, The variable light rendered the alien's optic nerve centers dull and dim as it moved among the inert forms of the rocks. It beheld a world of soft, ill-defined shapes in a pale magenta field of flickering heat. Schaefer crept forward, placing one foot in front of the other with all the stealth and skill of a Sioux scout. Suddenly, he would stop and strain to listen, trying to place the direction of the frightening scrape of the alien's spurs. The sound reverberated off the granite walls, so he couldn't pin it down long enough to fire at it. Nervously, he looked around in a full circle, uncertain where to move next. Then, unbelievably, he heard the whisper of a human voice, softly echoing among the rocks. It was Anna. "Look out! Behind you!" came the warning, almost seductive in its intimacy. Schaefer spun about, his breath catching as the words drifted to him. Wide-eyed and straining every tendon and muscle, he waited for the voice again, but heard nothing. Just the distant, muted flow of the river and the hissing and popping of the dying fire above. As the flames dwindled, the shadow grew longer and darker with every minute. Then Anna's voice again. "Look out, Major! Behind you!" Schaefer swiveled in place. "Anna!" he whispered back. It was almost pathetic, the need he felt just then to make contact with somebody human. Trance-like, he moved towards the sound. In a shallow cave among the rocks, not more than 20 feet from Schaefer, the alien mimicked the girl again. "Over here! I know the way out!" Numbly, Schaefer followed the bait, closer and closer. But as he moved in a kind of dream state, something made him pause at the sound of a more familiar voice. "Dylan, over here," came the voice of Mac. And Mac was dead. Bolting away with horror, Schaefer backed quickly into a narrow tuck between a boulder and the high sheer wall of the amphitheatre. His feet moved lightly as he went into a bowman's crouch, the shadow light deepening with the dying fire above, till he almost seemed like something ancient painted on the rock. Bow drawn, trapped against the rock, he heard the scraping sound of the predator once again. The noise came from the right, then shifted back to the left, then right again. The Major didn't know where to shoot and began to sweat with panic. It was time for more desperate weapons. The Major withdrew the flash grenade from around his neck. Then, with a swift jerk of the hand, he struck and tossed it forward, and it exploded, briefly illuminating the whole area below the bonfire. During that instant, Schaefer saw his enemy poised on a rock above him, its weapon raised, and about to strike. But momentarily blinded by the flash, the alien recoiled, ducking its head to the side. As the phosphorus shed by the grenade faded, Schaefer seized the advantage. Before the golden eyes could activate again, he hurled his bangstick spear. It smashed into the boulder at the creature's feet and detonated, exploding the face of the rock. The alien sprang back, too late, and shrapnel tore into its body. With a terrifying scream of pain and fury, the creature clutched frantically at its neck and chest. Then, with a second blood-curdling shriek of rage, it jumped off its rocky platform and disappeared into the night. Cascades of water surged over an 8-foot drop in the river's rocky bed as it coursed through the ravine, throwing up a perpetual mist. Schaefer, his bow still drawn, followed the weird trail of the alien's luminous amber blood as it dripped from the fresh wounds. As the Major ducked behind the falls, the mist sprayed him, washing off some of his clay camouflage. Fixated, he followed the trail like a starving panther on the scent of a plump boar. Schaefer's own shoulder bled freely down his arm and side, and the crimson mixed with the grey streaks of clay still clinging to his torso. Oblivious now to the searing pain in his shoulder, he took in huge hot gulps of air, his eyes wide and glowing, with vengeance. He looked with relish at an amber glob of alien blood, beaded like gum on a bamboo shoot. "Bleed, you bastard!" he hissed angrily. The Major flexed his bow, testing its vital tension, then resumed his tracking. He followed the luminous blood trail across the ledge, where a huge vertical boulder had shifted in an earthquake. There, the trail ended, abruptly. No more sign of the viscous amber ooze. Schaefer took another step forward, across a darkened alcove, and spun quickly as he felt the alien springing to action, out of the shadows.